I was delighted to hear the contribution from my colleague, the Honourable Samantha Rowe, especially to hear the voiced that animals are sentient beings. It speaks to my heart, and I would expect it speaks to the heart of all of us. Anyone who's owned a pet will know that we speak to the pet, even if the pet doesn't appear to understand us. We speak to the pet as if it did, and blow me down, I do think they do understand. At least that's a strong sense I get. So treating animals with respect and dignity, I think, is an essential part of proving our own humanity. And bringing this bill on, a bill I heartily support, I am grateful to the government for doing this. I'm also grateful to the opposition for pointing out the areas where this could be improved, although that might be difficult to see. And I'm also grateful to have heard by the Minister yesterday at question time that a complete rewrite of the bill is being drafted, and I expect to see the next iteration coming out, which will take account of how we may improve things further. Now, of course, you know, colleagues, exactly what I'm going to be saying now about the welfare of animals, following on from that one which so intrigued Honourable Kelly, who delighted in the concept that fish wellness could be enhanced with cannabinoids. And we talk a lot about that, so the Honourable Sophia and myself, because it does enhance the well-being of animals. And it's something that we ought to be looking at in more detail as well, because we're looking here at how can we improve the wellness of animals in all areas in Western Australia, whether it's going to be in farming or in the home circumstances. Now, there was a paper, I think my colleagues think I'm being flippant about this, I'm not. It's the University of Kansas College of Veterinary Medicine, entitled Marijuana Toxicosis in Two Donkeys. And my first concept, thought was, which two donkeys, can we name them? But the fact is, we're looking at this very, very seriously. And I do think we ought to be very careful about how we nourish our animals. Every farmer I know, every horse owner I know, will happily be feeding that horse with turmeric to manage the inflammatory conditions in the bowel and indeed the joints. How are we nourishing ourselves? We nourish our animals sometimes better than we nourish ourselves. And we ought to make that a feature of how do we care for our animals across the board, because a lot of my experience in Asia has been that we treat animals very differently. I saw yesterday in passing on the television here in our members' bar, I saw an advertisement asking us to help fund protection for animals treated in abominable cruelty. Bears being tied down with chains and harvested, dogs being slaughtered. It's beyond belief. And I think we ought to do everything we can in this country to ensure we do best practice. We found out that also a National University of Mexico, a study there concluding that dogs and cats suffering from seizures or epilepsy, contact and atopic dermatitis, degenerative myelopathies, asthma, diabetes, glaucoma and other inflammatory diseases could have a greatly improved quality of life if prescribed cannabinoids. And it goes on, I think, when it comes to the human consumption of animals, I personally, when I'm driving past or cycling past an abattoir, feel pain at the sound of the animals glimpsing their own mortality. I'll enjoy eating the meat, but I really am a hypocrite in that I couldn't actually be the one killing the animal concerned. I couldn't do it. Depends how hungry I was, of course, but it's something, it's a conflict we have. How do we care for those animals? And so the idea of being humane about how we treat our animals is a concept dear to my heart, and I expect dear to the heart of all in this chamber and the wider society in Western Australia. Now, when we're nourishing ourselves with hemp products, that's fine, it's safe and actually very good food, omega-3, 6 and 9, very useful for us. And I'd heartily recommend that we do incorporate more hemp products into our own nutrition. However, the DPERT has been investigating, I think recently, what's the effect of feeding animals with hemp products and how much THC would then be present in that system, and can we then ban that, or are we able to export that because of the restrictions of having a so-called dangerous substance in the system. And it has to be said, and I have to point out, the question really is how many kilos of meat do we have to actually take? And we're talking here thousands of kilos of meat to achieve the effect of one joint of cannabis. Now, you all know I deprecate the concept of smoking in all its forms. But if you're worried about the content of a tiny amount of THC in the meat, because it might be involved with causing people to have a high, which is completely illogical, unscientific, and wrong in every aspect, then we're preventing ourselves from feeding our animals a substance which can be very helpful, very beneficial for their well-being. We need open minds, and I will be saying again and again in this chamber in this year that innovation is going to be an important part of what I speak about, following the science and having an innovative mindset. And I think if we're having a revamp of this bill coming up shortly, I would beg the department to consider that we introduce this into the concept of how do we care for our animals better. Chronic pain in animals is also covered in the research. And there's a fine study in Poland which looks at the benefit of hemp as a food source for pigs and other animals too. Now, one notable improvement in the bill, I note here, is the designated inspector as a member of the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development staff. And this addresses a number of concerns and should reassure some of the industry stakeholders. I do, however, and I pointed this out in the briefing, I thank the department for that, this a potential issue of having a minimum sentence, a community order, of a fine of at least $2,400 for aggravated trespass. But then it stated, but in exceptional circumstances, we could actually remove that. So minimum need not be applied if the court is satisfied that exceptional circumstances have been proven. Now, on the one hand, we're trying to tie the judiciary's hands with the mandatory sentencing, and on the other, we're giving a loophole as well. So I think there's lack of clarity, there's lack of certainty, and I personally would like to see no excuses for those who actually are putting animals at risk or harming their welfare, or indeed, and very importantly, the welfare and the health of those who are caring for the animals. There ought to be, I think, a limit when we say this behaviour is unacceptable. While we can accept that you have a concern about the safety of the animal, there is a limit to what you can do, and if you overstep that limit, as is laid out in this bill, then there will be a fine, and the minimum is going to be so much, and leave it to the judge to decide. But I would anticipate that we ought to give proper punishment for those who put others, and that's animals and humans, at risk. Mandatory sentences are often problematic. They do limit the discretion of the judges. I will talk about this in other aspects later, on other bills, but that is my opinion on the mandatory sentencing component. Another significant proposal is the exclusion of extensive farming operations where grazing is a key component of the animal food production system. That will ease some concerns, but it may be worth examining this in the Committee of the Whole House to see that it's genuinely justified and not overly restrictive. Apart from that, I would think I'm very happy with the content of the bill. I would be supporting that in all its ways. There are points which no doubt will be brought out in the second reading part of this speech, the Committee of the Whole House, and I look forward to supporting the bill in due course.
Members, the questions.